Hi, everybody. I'm Don Marcel with Stout Tanks and Kettles, here with special guest Tom Bly from Craft Brew Alliance and the pH Experiment. Looking forward to discussing innovating your cold side operations. Hope that you are all having a great day, and look forward to covering some different topics for you here. So I'm going to flip over to this PowerPoint, just kind of go slide by slide here with you, but just a reminder that the side chat bar, you can put any questions. Our moderator will forward them up during the Q&A section. So yeah, it would have been a whole different experience had we been down in CBC San Antonio. We probably would have been recovering from the Electric Blues and Brews event that we would have at Dos Serenos with the music of Ty Curtis. Kind of disappointing, but glad that we are able to continue on here virtually and get the information out to you, and also hopefully bring a little bit of knowledge your way. So the situation's pretty terrible, but we're all resilient, and I think we're going to kick its ass. I want to kind of take a moment and just kind of salute all the fellow brewers out there. You know, they're trying to keep their businesses afloat, whether by changing their methods, doing a little more off-site, either deliveries or having scheduled pickups for their product. But just want to take a moment and to cheers them. I'm going to give a quick cheers. Has a great beer. I'm supporting my local brewery up here in North Portland, Occidental. They have a delicious Maibach. What do you have there, Tom?
I've just got some non-alcoholic water.
Okay. Someone's got to actually work today, so that's good. Cheers, everybody. And if you guys want to tell us where you're from and what you're drinking, that'll always be a kind of fun thing to have out there. So we're going to just kind of keep an eye out here. So thanks for making it here. I'm just going to actually leave the camera on. I was flipping back and forth, but I think this works well. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. You know, considering the circumstances here, taking the time out of your schedule, joining us here today, very much appreciate it. It helps to build the strength of the brewing community to have us do these webinars and lectures, and also just to have a sense of community right now when everybody's so separated. So I'm going to go quickly over a little bit about me. You have all the bullet points there. I don't necessarily need to read all that, but just spent about 8.5 years working at one of the great breweries here in town, Hopworks Urban Brewery. Got a chance to experience many different styles, lots of experience on different equipment, kind of working in a pseudo production environment / brew pub. When we started, it was at about 2,500 barrels that I started at, and by the time I left, they were producing about 15,000 barrels. So had a great time there, met some amazing people, and kind of took that to the next level in 2018 when I took a job with Stout, working on brewery design as a consultant. So still doing that, still having a chance to do some training and some mentorship, and that was pretty much my favorite part of being in the brewery anyway, especially towards the tail end of my career there. So one of those people that I got a chance to meet was Tom, and I couldn't ask for a better friend, mentor, kick-ass boss. But now I have him here, and luckily he's going to contribute to our discussion today. Tom, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself over there?
Sure thing, Don. I'm Tom Bly. I'm the Innovation Brewmaster for Craft Brew Alliance and also a co-founder of the pH Experiment, which is an innovation arm of Craft Brew Alliance. Grew up in Germany, so always had a love and respect for continental style pilsners and lagers. That continues to this day. It's still my preferred style. And currently my role is just really facilitating exploration of ingredients, processes, innovation through R&D, and then innovation within different areas and arenas and disciplines. So packaging, white space analysis, and just beverage analysis at large. And then trying to do that all at the same time while engaging consumers and trying to understand what consumers really want and getting engagement as to how to construct beverage moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom.
And also just welcome everyone to the conversation. And Don, thank you for having me be a part of this this presentation.
I truly appreciate it. So over here we have kind of a technical definition of innovation. I'm going to just read it real quick. It's the creation, development, implementation of a new product, process, or service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. And that's just kind of a mouthful. It does cover what we're talking about, but it is definitely can probably be simplified in a much better way, especially by Tom. So I guess my big question is, being an innovation brewer and running a lot of the projects that you do, Tom, what exactly does it mean to you in your capacity?
The term innovation, I think, gets bantered around quite a bit and gets misused and appropriated, but I think the way that you framed it is the right way to frame it, and that's the exploration or the creation, development, and execution of really understanding a new product, a process, or a service. But sometimes that innovation comes from outside of brewing. Sometimes it's from other industries, but it should be always mindful of expansion of learned behaviors and also of continuous improvement. So for me, it's a bolt-on. It's never just the chassis. It's the additional accoutrements that actually expand the vernacular of what brewing and beer can be.
Thanks, Tom. So why is this important now? Well, money trees don't exist. They're totally fantasy, but if you find one, let me know. I think just being smart and revisiting your procedures is going to make your life better. Less time to do your process, savings of money, less wear and tear on your workforce. And when you have a small brewery, obviously you, because you're doing almost everything, a competitive advantage to keep top quality beer out there in the market at all times, and a lot of variety as well. And just allowing you to maximize the available beer in and outside of your walls. And we're noticing that now a lot with the switch that people are having to make in order to go off premise with a lot of their product, and the explosion of cans and crowlers and to-go packaging. So why is it so important? Well, once we get past COVID-19, it's going to be that much more important, because every drop of beer is going to be that much more critical to keeping your brewery afloat. And we're going to be playing a little bit of catch up. And when I looked at this picture, I just thought, oh, this is the Roaring '20s after the Spanish flu. And if you took everybody and changed their clothes out, I'm sure you would probably see a much different environment there, maybe more current, maybe a little more social distancing, but I think we can do it. I think we can find ways to continue to innovate, to continue to change our business process, and to keep going with the momentum, even if it's going to be a single-digit growth. I want to see growth this year. So with that, I have our first poll of the presentation here. How many of you have received your first delivery of beer at home? And this kind of comes in with the changing of rules in a lot of different areas. Also, just I get a kick out of it. I think of it like the milkman of old, but now we actually have somebody who's bringing the beer to our house. It's allowing us to keep thriving in this market and under these circumstances. So definitely was curious to see how many of you actually have that. I know a lot of you are scattered around the United States and around the world, so definitely love the input. During this kind of breakdown of cold site operations, I look at it and I think of three main areas we're talking about. We're talking about the improvement of your process, efficiencies that can be gained there, the equipment potential. I use that term not only for the current use of equipment, but new and exciting proposed uses for equipment. You know, sometimes thinking outside the box, using something in a manner which it wasn't originally designed, but that can actually advance your brewery. And then towards the end, I think I'm definitely going to send it more Tom's way. We're talking a little bit about R&D, new product captures, maximizing the product stream. I feel as though in the capacity of what he's doing now, but also even in the time that Tom was with me at Hopworks, we had to explore and try to innovate and come up with new ideas for products, see what the market was doing, and kind of respond accordingly. So bear with me. The process fundamentals, although very important, can be a little dry. So we're breaking it down. What we know that's bad. All of these things can contribute to the destruction of your product, and any way that you can kind of minimize them or find a better way to do them is encouraged. So we're looking at overall oxygen pickup post-fermentation, definitely a bad thing. Microbiological contamination, that can come from many different areas. So having good process is going to be key. Over or under pitching yeast. One thing to keep in mind is just being consistent no matter what you do. Definitely following guidelines is important as well, but at least if you have a certain amount of consistency, your product will be more received because it's not going to fluctuate so much. Failure to control temperatures or pressures. Failure to remember where your beer is. I mean, that's huge. Sometimes out of sight, out of mind can definitely impact that. And just making sure that you never put it out of sight and forget about it, because that's your hard labor. And then failure to control oxidizing chemicals. One thing that you learn over the course of time is that cleanliness is important in a brewery, but that last step of sanitizing, sometimes those chemicals you are using, if you go overboard, you will definitely have a negative impact on your product. So how do we combat these things? To avoid O2 pickup, you know, having a proper purge method, low pressure when possible. The CO2 blanket from the bottom of your tank is important. You don't want to disrupt it. So a nice slow, even fill is going to keep that blanket intact. It's also going to conserve CO2 right now, which is definitely something you want to keep in mind, because certain areas of the United States and the world are going to experience a lacking of CO2 due to the lack of petroleum that's being used. So make sure you have well purged hoses with block and bleed setups. Simple block and bleed is a T with 2 butterflies on there. Allows you to continuously flow. Once everything is purged, flipping one closed and the other open and going into the tank without interruption. And cleaning bright tanks under pressure when possible. So that is also an important thing to learn. It's going to save you chemical and CO2. How do we avoid microcontamination? A hot lava mentality. When you have equipment, if you have a gasket that touches the floor, it's dead. If you have any piece of equipment that is going to be actively in contact with the beer and it hits the floor, treat it as dead. The important part about that is that it doesn't take much to contaminate a batch of beer. So always be overly cautious with that. Make sure that the equipment is clean, that the brewers themselves are clean, and that the environment is clean. I mean, When we're talking about being in the brewery, we're talking about a brewer's job is 85% janitorial. It's important to make the environment clean, and a clean, it's the old saying, a clean brewery makes clean beer. Collect your sterile whirl packs off the heat exchanger during knockout. Now, there's a lot of people out there that don't do this. This is a easy, inexpensive way to make sure that you do not have a contamination problem in your wort. And it's amazing to me how many don't do that, because it's a very easy process, very inexpensive, and can save you a lot of headaches. Having separate spray bottles, both of current day, either iodophor paracetic, and then a separate one for isopropyl. So you're using the less expensive chemicals to clean off the area of any sort of foreign debris, and then isopropyl at the end in order to make sure that it's full-on sanitary. Keeping your yeast happy, oxygenate and nutrient if you can. Some places are, I know we were limited. We couldn't use nutrients at Hopworks because of the organic certification. It forced us not to be able to use nutrient, but where you can, definitely use it. Make those cell walls strong. Remember to use proper amounts and do your cell counts to back it up. Whether you're doing a process such as cone to cone or brink, establish a baseline. Make sure that whatever you're doing is consistent. You'll get consistent results that way. Keep an eye on the generations, viability of the yeast cells, and remember to put in that order before it gets too late. You don't want to have those outlying batches on late generations that are just not cleaning up right. They just tend to be more problematic than they're worth. Don't repitch your stressed yeast, and yeast off to avoid autolysis. Another thing that Tom had mentioned was the acetaldehyde production that is noticed, or acetaldehyde that is present from lacking of proper yeast off. So,
just to add to that, John, some of that is yeast specific, but it's also a byproduct of overpitching and also really unhealthy yeast. It's just something we've anecdotally seen, and so just wanted to highlight that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Let's see here. We're going to get through this last one here. Sorry, this is a little dry, but we'll get to more exciting stuff in a second. But as we failure to control temperatures, we want to create a double check, make sure that when crashing tanks that there's good communication amongst the workforce. The reason I put the note in there is because we had a circumstance where someone had crashed a tank, caught hell for it. The person giving hell was the person that made the mistake next. So we're all fallible. We all can make a mistake. Just having good process in order to figure out how we're going to avoid that. Consider that their mulligan. Learn your basic troubleshooting of your solenoids. That's an important thing. It's common for them to have foreign objects, solder, PEX, or other material in there. So a good flush of the system beforehand. And then just know when to call in the big guns. When you have temperature troubles, never turn a blind eye to it, because your product can quickly go from something exceptional to something terrible. And waiting to call on that can definitely be a big problem. Failure to control pressures, checking your equipment on a regular basis. Your pressure relief valves, bunging devices, make sure that they're working properly, and also inform your employees when it's a good time to bung or spund to capture CO2. You don't want to come in the next day and find out that a PRV has been going off all night and that the entire area is sitting at about 2% CO2. So, failure to remember. When you have barrels or a barrel program, you have to staff it. You can't have someone up and forget about it. You have to make sure those barrels are properly topped off and that they're being tasted on a regular basis. There is a window for these beers. that you can definitely lose. And then failure to control oxidizing chemicals. Make sure to have a good titration, proper setup so that you can not only show that your equipment's been cleaned, but also have an idea as to the strength of the chemicals used. What's another way to combat all the things, the bad things? Well, follow the words of a very smart man, Mr. Thomas Edison. Here's a couple quotes that he had that I thought were kind of relevant and just kind of fun, actually. You know, when he says, if there's a way to do it better, find it. And those are words to live by with anything. I think that there are ways to definitely improve, and that just never stops. I think it's just a matter of how far and frequent they happen. But finding those moments when you actually manage to shave off a half hour or an hour of time and do something more efficient, or not have to do it in such a backbreaking fashion, is important. And then another quote of his was, "Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work." Well, brewers wear overalls and we're not afraid of work. So there's really no excuse to not improve your process. Take what you can learn from visiting other breweries. Pick up a new way to do something. I swear this was like one of my favorite things to do for a long, long time. And, you know, prior to having a child, I would go off on what I would call like a brewery vacation or a brewery getaway, where you could take a look and you could really see how people are doing something. And even if you pick up one little thing, it's going to make your job so much better. Surround yourself with great brewers, and this can either be the existing team. When you're hiring, hire fresh blood. Bring in some new perspective. Attend the events that are happening with your local guilds and just your local brewers in general, and just maintaining that great beer community. All right. I'm going to take a sip of my beer, and I'm going to let Tom take over for a second here, okay?
So, Don, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if you could just take over for a moment.
Absolutely. Don, we have one of your hopbacks, and this is probably the most used piece of equipment we have in the Innovation Brewery at CBA. We do use it as a hopback on occasion, but more honestly, we use it for a myriad of other reasons. We use it to cold brew coffee. We use it for spice additions. We use it for fruit inclusions if we want to knock out into a fermenter with various fruits. We've even used it for whole cluster grapes. We've done teas with it. We've made kombucha with it. And having a false bottom on the bottom really allows us to have a lot of flexibility in how we create variations on a theme downstream.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. One of the other pieces, oh, sorry, I forgot about the poll. Poll number 2. I was curious to see how many of you make an infused beer, whether you use fruit, spices, coffee, tea, etc. I mean, etc. could be anything. I've even heard of people using salt water, you know, any number of things. But yeah, how many of you do that and at least have one product that you've kind of experimented with in that fashion? So another product that we have that I find is kind of interesting is, the first time I saw this, I didn't think of its initial use, and that was when we're talking about the symbiosis fermenter. We created these with the idea of kombucha, but the first time I saw it, I thought of just mini cool ships, and to this day, I still think that's a great application. If you have the right spot to put them in your building, where you can either look for that wild yeast to come in, maybe near a garage door or something they can open and close, maybe even modifying the existing structure with a little bit of screen in order to keep out any sort of flies or any sort of bugs that could, you want the bugs that you want, but you don't want the bugs that want to climb in there. So And then when I look at the other picture, it was just, this is a cool one, and I didn't give it photo credit. I should definitely at least say something about it. But this is a gigantic cool ship from the Anchor Brewery. And for those of you who have never been able to go on that tour, it's just fantastic. It's great to see, some of the original brewing practices that were out there, and some of the, always remember where our roots are and where things were started. So, and then I get this question a lot. This is Unitanks versus Brights. So many people want to go with Unitanks. Many people ask me, what is the merit of a Bright? And with proper procedure, you can do either. Using a Unitank is going to save you a little bit of floor space, a little bit of money. It's also going to, you're going to be able to do all of the process in one vessel because they're all pressure rated. But when you're talking about certain styles of beer where clarity is important, or where, say, you have a production schedule that you're trying to stay on, sometimes having that bright tank, which is a little more forgiving because it has the dish bottom versus a cone bottom, is important. And also being able to quickly transfer over to that bright tank and immediately start cleaning and get going with another brew is important as well. So it's personal preference, but I am a big fan of bright tanks. I feel that they still have plenty of purpose. And those people on a budget, if you have great procedure, you can still do Unitanks as well. These are actually fermenters, and there was a bright on the end that kind of got cut off. But this is for my buddy down in Mexico, Pablo, just showing his place and how amazing his brewery is. Had a chance to go down there and brew with him, and it was awesome. So Pablo, the Godfather, says hello. All right. Ooh. Poll number 3. This kind of brings me to the last poll that I have here, just whether you're pro hazy IPA or against hazy IPA. That kind of falls in line with the actual use of Unitanks. If you're going to have a hazy IPA, some people are more inclined to use Unitanks. They don't necessarily feel as though they need a bright tank. But it's also kind of just a test of what the market is doing right now. I know that IPAs that are hazy have great flavor, but they also, for traditionalists who have been trained for years to have the clearest of beer, a lot of people are also waiting for what the next newest and exciting beer craze is going to be. So, all right, now we're at the homework and the R&D, and I think I'm going to pass that along to Tom here. This is definitely his wheelhouse, and I feel as though as much as I can talk on it, he is the authority.
Thanks, Don. Just thinking about innovation on cold side and just downstream and how you can diversify your portfolio. When you think about what your consumers are looking for, you're going to have a diaspora of folks coming in wanting to drink different products. And an easy way to alleviate some of that is to take existing wort streams as they come through process, and when they're in fermenter, making modifications so that you can actually have multiple options available to you. When we get over COVID-19, there's no understanding of whether or not this is going to be an immediate rush to produce, or if there's going to be a tiered, stepped reaction as we try to build up our inventories and get back into the flow of things. And so with that in mind, something we practice quite frequently, and it allows us a lot of flexibility to, one, fine-tune process and fine-tune recipes, but it gives us some really insightful information on attributes of yeast or on different dry hopping techniques. And so when we have different vessels, we can learn things very quickly, but you can easily take something and add fruit, or you can add chocolate or vanilla, or you can nitrogenate something, or you can take a cask and get something available. And you're really helping to yourself in the long run to diversify your portfolio so that you're giving something to everyone that comes through the door, and not just simply alienating them with maybe 10 or 12 IPAs and not giving them the breadth of variety that they may be looking for.
And then, yeah, this product over here on the right, Tom, this was your handiwork, wasn't it?
That's an example of something we did that is it's based on a POG. It's a low ABV session IPA that has passion fruit, orange, and guava added to the hot side, and then we additionally add some an uptick of flavor just to enhance it at the very end in Bright Tank.
Excellent, excellent, cool. All right, I believe we are into our questions section here. We're moving a bit fast here, but that's good. That leaves plenty of room for questions, and also the opportunity if you guys need to get a beer break in between before the next presentation. Oh, no more presentations for the day. So maybe get an early start on your evening, but I think we're ready for the questions. So I don't know if Mike, if you're out there, if you want to start pulling some questions for me. And Tom, and then we'll both get our cameras up here and we can kind of explain what's going on here. So looks like we have a cool ship. So a cool ship, as you saw on both sides there, is a large vessel that is very narrow, not very narrow, very wide and very squat, and it allows the wort to be brought across it in a way that it's gonna lose its temperature, and it's gonna allow it to slowly come down to temperature. But it's a wide open area that allows for wild fermentations for those people who are doing it. In the case of Anchor, I don't think they did wild. They just had a actual room that was enclosed that they used it. But it's an old way to make a cool ship. And Tom might actually have some more tidbits there. And this other thing is, yes, we can make cool ships. That is something that we can make. So, Tom, in your time, you've seen a whole bunch of different breweries. What's kind of like a cool ship moment in your experience?
I think the highlight for me probably would be being at Cantillon and seeing an opportunity there, and then also Thresh Fontaine.
We have a question from Bradley. How do you see IP under pressure? Very carefully. There is an extensive procedure for that. What you're doing is you're not using a caustic for your cleans. You're using an acid, and that allows it to be used in a CO2 environment and not create a precipitate in there or a negative reaction with the pH of the CO2. And it's going to definitely allow you to save a lot of CO2 usage and minimize oxygen pickup as well. But the chemicals that you are using are nitric or what was the other acid? I think it's, well, the one that we used was nitric. I can't remember what the other acid was, but definitely have to be careful with it. What was it, Tom?
Might have been. I was going to say it might have been a phosphoric
That's the
blend.
other one, yes. What are sterile whirl packs? I really should have had a picture in there for you. I'm sorry about that. But they are small, sterile plastic bags. And you can order them very inexpensively online. They have a perforated top. And what you do is off of your heat exchanger, off of a sample valve, you would hit it with isopropyl alcohol. You would flame it. Then you would also collect your sample with a little bit of oxygen pickup in there. So your oxygen stone would be turned on. And then you would quickly close it, and it's whirled so that it closes up and it seals. And you put them aside for the duration of a couple days. And if there is a bacterial infection or some sort of microorganism, you will probably see it there. It should be done before you pitch yeast so that you don't have any false positives. Luckily, I haven't seen many of those, but when they grow up, when they are a bad whirl pack, they will actually swell so much that sometimes they'll explode, make a little bit of a mess. Where is the hop water from, Tom?
This one is one of my own creations. We're exploring a myriad of different varietals and just seeing what plays nice. Non-alcoholic options, just playing with some of the hop inventory that we have on hand.
Excellent. What are typical problems you guys have encountered at upstart breweries on the cold side? Is it process, experience, or anything else? It could be so many things. Process definitely, especially for newcomers to the industry. Sometimes just relaying certain facets of the cold side operations, proper cleaning. I know that if you don't necessarily, one of the things I've seen before is instead of utilizing CIP approach, which is clean in place, and using proper chemicals, proper dilutions, sometimes people will manually agitate the inside of tanks, creating scratches, causing areas to harbor bacteria. Also, I think there's a lot of people out there that come from a homebrew background that haven't necessarily experienced a lot of oxygen uptake or had to kind of prevent oxygen uptake. And I think those are good things that are kind of picked up at the very beginnings of working in a commercial brewery. My advice to anyone that is looking to get into a brewery situation where you're going to either be an owner or a operator at a brewery, and is to just get that knowledge in advance, whether it be through an apprenticeship or through some sort of schooling. Just making sure that that you learn that concept, because downstream is where beer goes to die. If you don't, any step that you have along the way, you can destroy a perfectly good beer. And it's this totem pole. It's why packaging is one of my least favorite areas, because I feel it's an area that perfectly good beer can go to die if it's not properly handled. And if you have a good packaging person, pay them whatever they want within reason. It'll pay off, because you'll get good product out there that'll definitely represent your brand in a good fashion. So.
I've always said your last touch point with beer is on the packaging line, so you better treat it right there, because otherwise all the hard work you've done on the front side of that is all for naught.
Excellent. Is that all our questions, or are there any more? Kind of getting in here. 1 second. Can you please explain the Sterile Whirl Pack collection? Okay. I kind of briefly went over it for you. Alexander, if you want to email me, I can definitely follow up with a little more detail on it. But there's not too much outside of what I kind of explained with the collection of it. Just that utilizing very good practice and making sure that everything is clean to avoid a false positive is key. So, all right. Well, oh, here we go. We have another one popped in. What is the best vessel for fresh hop beers? I want to get more aroma. Ooh, this is a fun one. I'm gonna let Tom start with this one, I think. Oh, Tom, you're off. I think your mic's off for a second here.
So what I was going to say is, one of the things I think that's complicated about that question is there's a lot of different places that you can introduce fresh hop, right? You can do it hot side, you can do it cold side. And what I've come to learn over my extended career with fresh hop beers is you can go overboard. There was at one point I was going something like 10 to 1 on fresh hop versus dry hop usage. And then it got to a point where I was using 20 pounds per barrel, 30 pounds per barrel. And I found at about 15 pounds per barrel, we took it too far. You start to develop some IBMP, some IPMP, some really vegetative and lingering notes of fresh hop. So
just for a second, Tom, what were some of those abbreviations?
There are basically compounds that are commonly found when you pick materials too early in harvest. And so since hops are an agricultural product, that same thing holds true. And I don't remember the exact abbreviation and what it stands for. I've always just used shorthand, but if you look it up online, you should be able to find it pretty quickly. It's very, very in wine. Oftentimes it'll throw off a green bell pepper note or a pea note, like I said. Sometimes it'll manifest itself as leather. So what I've come to find is I like to use it in a myriad of complex ways. I like to layer it in. So I use a little bit in the whirlpool, and then or hop back, and then I'll go ahead and use quite a bit in conditioning and fermenter. And so we'll transfer or add them to at that point and allow that to really kind of permeate, so we get more of that watermelon characteristic or that kind of more classic fresh hop note, as opposed to having it become too grassy and too leathery.
No, very good. Back.
So
I was just remembering one of the later beers. Prior to me leaving Hopworks, we had done a beer for the Oktoberfest that happens in Mount Angel over here in Oregon. We did the experimental version of the Hallertau Abiqua. It was a strain that I've later found. I think there's a road that's Abiqua over there, and it's that field. But it was definitely experiencing that green pepper that you were talking about. The funny thing is, it was all added on the cold side, and that beer changed. And that's the thing about fresh hop beers that you have to know, is that fresh hop beers are constantly evolving beers. And within the course of a week, that incredible heavy green pepper really just mellowed. And now that was after it was pulled off of that. So it was in sanitized mesh bags inside of a bright tank, then transferred out to another bright tank. And that's the cool part about the cold side adding of hops that kind of came out, I don't know, I want to say 2 or 3 years before I left the brewery. I started noticing people doing that. They may have been doing it much earlier than that, but instead of adding them on the hot side and getting kind of various results, we were starting to add them on the cold side and getting more consistent results. And then having an easy way to just take a sample, take a flavor. Once you have what you want, transfer off of it. And but even with that, those beers do modify over the course of time. They do kind of evolve. So 190 proof grain alcohol.
Looks like we have a question
in lieu of isopropyl. I believe so. Yes, I think that it would definitely kill anything. And for those of you that have access to that, I wonder if that's who I think it is that asked that one. So, but yeah, definitely you can use that, and it'll keep your area safe there. So, all right. Well, how do you avoid a hop geyser when dry hopping? Well, that's a good one. That's a good one. Do you want me to go first? Or you want to go first on that one, Tom? Okay.
Go ahead.
I think just it goes down to procedure. When I first came to the brewery, we were dry hopping very early, and I've seen people experience that hop geyser, and it's as you're dropping the hop pellets in there, you're creating nucleation points in an active fermentation, and when you do that, you definitely can experience that volcano. And it's being the former safety manager of the brewery, it's something that you got to watch out. It's definitely scary. I've seen people stuck on top of a tank trying to keep it from like going crazy. I think the biggest thing is at that point, it's already going to be a certain amount of loss. You don't want to lose your life in the process. So making sure that if you're on a ladder, that you have all of your safety gear. A lot of times going up, make sure you have a secondary gasket so you can get those things closed if possible. Sanitary secondary gasket. But just knowing the beer and knowing where it is in the cold side process. So when you dry hop, it shouldn't be all that far out from terminal gravity. If you're doing it much too early, you're actually blowing off aromatics from your dry hop and getting less of a result. So sometimes patience is key there, and it leads to a better product. So.
One call out I'll make though, John, is that there's a lot of brewers that are adding slightly above terminal, and they're doing that just because they assume that there's going to be hop creep over the duration of the dry hopping, and so they want to make sure that they're not seeing an uptick of diacetyl at the very end of fermentation.
Yeah, and you know, like I said before, terminal, but not so far out that you still have you know, 3 or 4 degrees Plato to continue going on. So. Can you touch quickly on spunding? Do you make any tanks with a working pressure of 2 bar or more? Yes, we do. We do make 2 bar vessels. Spunding is the process of collecting CO2 over the course of the natural fermentation. A lot of people feel that the bubbles that are achieved are going to be smaller and they're going to be longer lasting, leading to a different mouthfeel. You experience that a lot with lagers. Yeah, I think it's great if you have it built into your process, especially if you're a good lager brewer. So sometimes on the ales, I don't necessarily see the benefit as much, but I think that if things keep going and we find ourselves hurting on CO2, people are going to either try to capture some of that or start looking into the addition of natural sugars. You raise a few degrees for dry hopping. Typically, I hadn't. I feel like at the temperature that you're at, you should still be fine. You do want like a warm contact for at least 24 to 48 hours, and then from there, then you can start to crash. But there's a couple other methods. Maybe I'll let Tom talk about it, hop bursting and some of the others that allow you to kind of like maximize and rehydrate the hops. But typically, yeah, you're looking at just getting enough warm contact to get the flavors that you desire and the hop oils you desire, but not too much time where you start to get a lot of vegetal kind of flavors.
Yeah, for me, it really depends on where you're at in process. I mean, historically, I haven't increased temperature, but with the inclusion of hop creep with some of the newer varietals of hops, we allow free rise to occur during dry hopping just because we're usually at towards the tail end of fermentation anyway. And as we're trying to reduce diacetyl, it plays a part in that role. And so it happens simultaneously. As far as other processes, we're really keen on hop bursting, on dip hopping, different techniques of that sort too. I know that everyone's really keen on using whirlpool hops at a really lower temperature to avoid isomerization. But the technique we oftentimes employ is to take hops right at the beginning of fermentation before we knock out into the fermenter, include a little bit of either wort or hot water and allow it to sit there for about, and by hot water, I mean something around 160 to 180 degrees, and allow it to sit for about 15, 20 minutes before we see the inclusion of wort. It works really well. We get really nice flavors that way, but it's kind of a replacement to the whirlpool, and you still see some flash off and you see some loss of aroma, but it generally creates really nice flavor and still retains more aroma than traditional methods.
Yeah, and that hop creep that you were talking about, like you said, that's specific to certain strains of hops. I know that I've heard that Mosaic was one of them that definitely really had a diacetyl component that could pop up and just surprise you. So awesome. Is there any more questions? What is a good lager schedule? Well, slow and steady. Definitely, I don't think you can give enough time to a good lager. I don't necessarily feel comfortable even working with a lager any less than 5 weeks. And that's if you have a good filtration regimen. But I don't know. I think that a lot of that is specific to the brewery itself. I know there's some breweries that will actually leave their lagers at ferment the whole way at temperatures as low as say 48. And not actually even bring it up for diacetyl rest, but they're giving it so much time that it will actually clean up. But on a production level, that's hard to replicate unless you're one of those big old breweries, you know.
And I'll be somewhat contrarian. We've found that we usually lager or see an entire cycle time of about 21 to 28 days, as opposed to weeks, 8 weeks. And so what we generally find is that the most important aspect is the fermentation curve and that onset of fermentation. I've fermented lagers as cold as 45 degrees and then slowly step them up over time. But I think that lag in fermentation and that really cold controlled reduction of ester development is really the key to lagering. So I spend more of my time on the front end and less time worried about it on the conditioning side, because I really don't see a lot of benefit there in terms of the rounding out or the softness of flavor that one might expect coming from that conditioning process.
Let's see. What is the best dry hopping technique for the least amount of oxygen pickup? Ooh, that's definitely a Tom question.
That one's a tough one, right? Typically, we all get on ladders and we add them on a dry hop port, and hence the nucleation scenario that we talked about. I personally prefer to use a delivery method that eliminates oxygen. So if you have a hop cannon or some other form of delivery, that's an ideal state. In my past life, I've even just simply taken hops and added them to a secondary uni tank or to a secondary conditioning tank, done a slow methodical purge with a CO2 blanket. And once I felt that the tank was devoid of any O2, then I would go ahead and just simply transfer onto another tank, from one tank to another onto the hops. And that was a really gentle way of dry hopping, but it increased, your chemical use because you had two tanks that were dirty instead of one.
Yeah. And I know that I believe you were still there when we had it, but we had the Rolec unit we were using that was supposed to macerate and supposed to mix on the tanks. And from a safety standpoint, I liked it just because you weren't up on top of the tank. But I don't believe we really saw any. They definitely sold it as something that was going to increase your hop yield, and I don't feel it necessarily did. If anything, I feel as though the maceration led to more vegetal flavor pickup. I think that a lot of the methods, like Tom's saying, is really a great method. We also have a small dry hopper that we sell that has the ability to be purged and hooked up to your 4-inch TC port, and that's always a nice way to do it as well. So yeah, definitely minimizing oxygen pickup, but also not freaking out about it either. When you're talking about dry hopping, there's still a little bit of active fermentation. So that tiny bit of oxygen, if you follow a good procedure, that tiny bit of oxygen should not necessarily be a full-on oxidative effect, because the yeast will actually still be active and possibly clean up some of that oxygen. So that would be the argument for dry hopping before you're fully terminal, because then whatever oxygen you do have come into the tank can be mitigated by the yeast. So. All right. Excellent. Did we make our way through all the questions? We just may have. And if that's the case, that'll give everybody a few more minutes here. And anything that we didn't cover in this presentation, we are happy to take offline question. And I'll also see if I can get the PDF form of this out so that it's available should anyone want the PowerPoint. I would have liked to have put that in the handouts. I didn't, unfortunately, but any of you that would like it, just let me know and I'll be happy to email that out to you. So awesome. Well, this was fun, getting a chance to see a good old friend that I haven't seen in a long time and talk a little bit of beer. And I hope you all found it informative. Thanks again to you, Tom, for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you're a busy guy over there, and I really do appreciate it. So.
Absolutely, Don. I was happy to be a part of this. And if anybody has questions or wants to follow up with anything, by all means, let me know. But cheers to everyone. And
cheers, everyone. Thank you.